just a few notes on this. And I understand there was supposed to be another program, and maybe that fell through, so I'm kind of doing a fill-in sort of thing, and I was asked to talk about maybe methods of research or Masonic education. And I'll take a different approach than perhaps you might expect. And my approach is this: anybody can do this. You don't have to have an academic background. It helps, and you might come to better conclusions. You might use a better methodology, but anybody can do this sort of thing that I've done today, when I spoke with you this morning, that so many other people have. And it's partly because you have to think outside the box about what constitutes education and what constitutes research. And I'll give you a couple of examples of things you might not think that you might be able to do in your local area, and it just takes either your time or your persistence or your decision to be involved in it. So one of the lodges that I belongs to in Helena, where I'm from, in Montana, has a series of record books, and there are ledgers that essentially record every member who is joining for a number of years in a sort of, at that time, a spreadsheet, right? So it lists the name, their profession, their job, where they're from, their age at the time, and so on. I got curious about this and realized several other lodges in the same town and nearby also had some of those. One of the things you might do if you got curious about this is there are programs where you can plug in like dates and places of things, and you can track via a computer program migration patterns, people moving from one place to another. You don't need any kind of special historical background, you don't need specialty training, you don't need to be a genealogist, but you can plot migration points. You can find people. What happens when you realize 50 out of 100 people who joined that lodge that year all came from Iowa, say? You might go, what happened at that time to make them leave Iowa and specifically all end up in that same town? So you might want to look at things that are outside what you might think of as a regular research sort of thing. I think that helps, and anybody can do that. Another thing that might help is that if you look at it from the perspective that even if you don't want to do the research, you can either facilitate or finance those who do. So one thing you might do is you might contact a local college or university, find a grad student or somebody who might need a project. Maybe they digitize records that you have. And for the same reason, like those membership lists that I was just talking about, they can use them for genealogical requests and so on. But again, the community might find a use out of that. You don't have to do that yourself, but you can pay or you can assist other people to do that. And maybe one of the things you decide upon with your local lodges is you say, it doesn't just have to be with the lodge. We had an Eastern Star here, or maybe a Job's Daughters, or D. Malay, or one of the other groups. And sometimes you find that some of the people who were involved in those ended up going on to do some interesting things in the town. So I think you sometimes need to get outside of the idea that even if you're only involved in that lodge level, maybe get into the headspace that there are other records available you might not be thinking about, especially from some of these groups that no longer exist, but the records are sitting in the lodge room somewhere, right? Another thing that I'd like to suggest is that, and this is an easy cheat, and this was not a resource that was available 30, 40 years ago, or even 15 years ago, is a gentleman by the name of Kent Waldron assembled essentially a bibliography of every known Masonic publication in the United States from 1734 with Benjamin Franklin's Constitutions up until 1850, I believe, okay? Now, this is fantastic. It goes through like the standard principles of bibliography. So you can talk to like the American Antiquarian Society or any of these groups that you would normally discuss things to find bibliographical information with. You open it up and it'll give you not only the title name, who the author is, a short description of the contents, the number of pages, but also locations you can find these at. Invariably, something like probably over 80% of those are found in Iowa at the Masonic Library and Museum. And Bill can attest to this, that you could get lost there and quite easily, right? And Iowa exceeds everybody in the amount of not just Masonic material, but also in many cases non-Masonic for a lot of the Masonic libraries that have outside of that. So what I would suggest is this also. It's a 2-volume book set. They're a little spendy, about $200 for the 2 of them probably. But if your lodge purchased a set of those, They might be out of print now again. Oak Knoll Press has probably put them into print again. You could then look up anything you'd like. Another way to do that, to look into those would be, and I'm trying to keep really short because I really like to keep maybe a 5-minute sort of thing here, and I'm pushing up against that, is this. Groups like the American Antiquarian Society have digitized virtually all of their earliest records because they hit several key American imprints. So what you could do is you might go to a local university or a library, a public library that partners with those and allows you to take a look through their records. And if you pair that research with this bibliography, you could get digital access to virtually all of those. So in my case, I got curious and I said, what would happen if I looked at the number of titles from 1734 to 1850? And it turns out there's like 634. And out of those, I've already collected 400 of them digitally, right? Because you just go on and you can either Google them, you can go to Google Books, or you contact the, you know, it's not something that's difficult. Anybody can do that. And that's kind of where I'm getting at here. And so I've had several people ask me about the presentation I gave this morning. How did I collect all of that? What would you recommend procedurally on how to do those things? And for those of you who weren't there, you wouldn't have had to be there. If you've heard me speak on anything, you'll know I can talk a lot. And at the end of it, it's essentially, what did you find and how did you find it? Just get curious, keep knocking on doors, and keep making phone calls. And I'll give you an example of one of those. I referred to a letter in that, it was written July 31st, 1816, and I'd gotten a copy of it, and it was written from one Jeremy Cross to an individual named John Snow. And it's handwritten, right? Here's a photocopy of the thing, right? But here's what you do if you get curious and you go, who might have something like that? So you contact like the great grandson or grandnephew of Snow, who's still alive and a Mason in Ohio, and you say, hey, would you mind getting me a copy of something like this? I think you might have it. And he writes back, oh yeah, and using his lodge letterhead, because he's a Mason. And you'd be surprised at how many of these things happen, how many of these things still exist, and that anybody can do it. And not just a Mason, but non-Masons, and not just academics, non-academics. And sometimes you might be interested to find out that your family wants to participate. So I'm going to close with this story. If you guys really wanted me to, and I don't want you to want me to, but if you wanted me to, I could go further. I'm going to tell you this story. In the supposed origins of Freemasonry, in 1717, beginning at the Guzheng Gridiron Tavern, there was a sign that hung out of that tavern, the Guzheng Gridiron sign. And it disappeared for a number of years, right? And people knew the location had been seen at last and just kind of floated by. There were engravings of the building. You would see the structure and this ugly, I mean, it was a pretty hideous goose actually. And there's some pretty funny stories of people talking about it. They refer to the ghastly visage, you know, scaring them at night when they walk in an alley as it's gaslit underneath and the thing had scabbed over and it was no longer bright and shiny, you know, which makes it more interesting to me because I can totally imagine going, wow, what was that thing, you know? So they call it the cooked Christmas goose and so on. So this thing had been missing for a while and it kind of crops up and it turns out it wasn't really missing. People just kind of forgot about where it was. And I had been chasing photographs of that building for a number of years. And at some point a photograph was found. And here's how the thing was found. And this is, I think, a prime example of why it doesn't just have to be you. You can include your family, and you don't have to be a trained historian or a professional. You just have to be curious. The person who found it was an individual named Bernard Williamson. Bernard Williamson was an entered apprentice. He'd only taken a single degree, didn't know much about the fraternity, but was completely excited about it. He loved everything he'd been reading about it and hearing about it, and so he's an English Mason. And he decides one time that he'd like to go do a little bit of research. And his wife tells him, you know what, I'd like to encourage that because it gives us a reason to get out of town, and I've been dying to get out of town, so let's go do that. She kind of really pushes him to doing this sort of thing. They go to London, they go to a particular museum, and in their archives, they're looking around through several large scrapbooks, right? And as they're flipping through, and she's helping him with all of this, she knows what he's looking for. So they're flipping through, and they find a photograph of the building. Now mind you, at this time, this is only a few years back, the only known images are engravings. Somebody sketched or engraved pictures of this. So nobody believes a photograph exists. So Bernard, being the sort of naive person that he was in this, picks up a telephone and calls the editor of a local Masonic magazine there in London and says, you know, I'm looking at a picture of the Guzheng Gridiron Tavern, but I'd really like to get a better quality photo because there's somebody moving and it makes this blur in the kind of bottom of the picture. I'd like to see one without that kind of, you know, thing that's in there. And the editor of the magazine's like, yeah, you know, if a photo existed, I'd give it to you, but there isn't one. And he says, well, I'm looking at one, and clearly there's somebody moving. I just want a better quality one. And he doesn't know that the assumption is there isn't one. When he realizes, the editor realizes, he is looking at a photograph of it, he describes it, puts the phone down, runs across town there, and wow, there it is. Now, that wouldn't have happened had he accepted the standard story that everything to know about that had been possibly learned. He wouldn't have discovered something like that if he hadn't had the support of his wife, who was actually probably more excited than he was to get involved in that. And he probably wouldn't have done something like that if he'd been a Mason for so long that he'd become jaded about that. You know, it's not just that everything had been learned about that, but what am I going to contribute because I'm not professionally trained? And I know that story because my final thought with this is this. I contacted him. Like, I wanted to know where this photograph came from, so I find out there's this guy in England who knew this, and I contact a few people, and I'm like, somebody give me his email or phone number. I know enough people, someone will get it to me. They did. We arranged a time on Skype, so we do a video conference call, and I just called him, and we sit there, and I'm on my computer, and I'm like, you tell me what happened. And I'm relating, in my own words, I might have gotten a detail or two wrong here or there, but what he did. And that, to me, sums up my perception of how you should do Masonic research or education, which is, if you want to know the answer, go looking for it, right? I wanted to know the story, so I just went out there and asked the guy who did it. And I wanted to know not only how he did it, but could I do that? And of course I could. I could definitely replicate what he did. I don't think that all the stories have been told. I don't think that it just has to be you. There are other people you know who will maybe be interested in it, and even if you don't want to do that, you might be able to encourage someone else. It might not be the person you suspect. A niece of mine who did, the time she was small, used to help repair some garage building with me. We'd go out and scrape paint or replace carpet and stuff. Really got interested because I was watching her. She's not slave labor, you know. But you know, we'd take her there and we'd do that sort of thing. And she became really excited to help me with a lot of those. She'd go, "Hey, did you find this thing here?" and bring it over. You would be surprised at the number of people who would be involved if you asked them to, right? So, don't be afraid to finance it. Don't be afraid to facilitate it. Ask the questions that you might not think, that you might not have thought about. Think outside the box. Don't believe everything has been told or all of the questions have been answered before you get there. Keep an open mind, and even if you don't want to do it yourself, find someone else who might want to and support them in that. And at the end of the day, I hope that groups of us like this take something back where we're a little bit more excited. You know, you find out that, hey, this was worth going to, that I enjoyed hearing what somebody else had to say, that I could be involved. And it shouldn't just excite you, it should kind of fulfill you, I think, at the end of the day. So that's my little spiel. I would love to say that I could go on forever, but in my experience, when you're all at a dinner and so on, sometimes the best part of that is the conversation that happens out here. And I do make it a habit of shutting myself up when at these sorts of events, so I appreciate it.